Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to have a conversation about feminism and why the arguments of feminism are not nearly as effective as they could be. I was prompted to discuss this particular topic after having seen a video on YouTube where a young lady was talking about feminism and why people maybe aren't interested in being feminists and why it's called feminism, and some of the arguments that she used were similar arguments which I've seen in other people's video. So I began to think about it and decided, well, is this really an effective argument in convincing people, and why or why not? So let's talk about it. Now, while I did use this video as a jumping off point, I want to be clear that I'm not responding directly to the creator of the original video, but I do want to include it in the notes so that when you're listening to my video, you can see kind of what prompted me to say the things that I have. So, it's often described by feminists that feminism is essentially gender equality. It's political, economic, social equality between male and female, or between all the genders, if there's more than two. And that's fine, but in terms of convincing people generally, you have to realize that that's only going to work amongst groups of people who value the label of equality, right? If you have two countries, you have country A, you have country B. In country A, they see themselves as fair and just, that they treat all of their citizens the same. Making an argument that we're only seeking to be fair and just and have equality amongst the gender can be a compelling argument. But in any culture where we have classes, we don't treat all of our people the same. These people are higher on the totem pole, these people are lower on the totem pole. It's a less effective argument, because saying we're trying to get equality presupposes that everybody is agreed that we want equality. If you're talking about a real, honest-to-goodness patriarchal society where a woman's role is to be subservient to a man, then the men are not going to be moved by the idea that you want everybody to be equal, because it's not part of their life view. So it's not the most effective argument. It works in countries like, say, the United States and in England and other countries where feminists, there are lots of them, because they are able to get purchased because people actually want to get to a place of equality. You hear arguments about, wage, gender imbalances, that women get 77 or 80 cents on the dollar or whatever it is. The only reason that that's a compelling argument is because in general in the society, people want it to be fair. They want to see people treated correctly, and usually that's because of some amount of goodwill that the group of women has in that society. If people want to feel like their mothers, they want to feel like their daughters are treated fairly, when you say there's a group of women being treated unfairly, it taps into that, but only to the extent that the people in that society care about being fair and care about the group that is being called the oppressed, right? If they don't care about the oppressed group, if we really hated women as a society, then nobody would listen to feminists to begin with, and no matter how much they complain that it was unfair, it wouldn't matter. The next kind of issue that I have in terms of feminism is where it talks about, women have been oppressed for hundreds of years or something like that, right? So one of the problems is nobody has been alive for hundreds of years. So the people who you are talking about having been oppressed going back to antiquity, they are all dead. And for the dead, you can do nothing for them. So there are people who are currently being oppressed now. And for those people, we should try to treat them fairly and with equanimity. But the problem with saying they were oppressed in the past and so therefore women are inherently disadvantaged is that you're trying to convince people to be willing to be discriminated against today to make up for past discrimination for other people who may or may not still be alive, right? And if we live in a society where there is no privilege, there is no male privilege, that's inherently unfair because you're punishing men or holding them back for no good reason or giving advantage to women without cause. If we live in a society where there is privilege, then what you're actually asking is for the men who have the control and the privilege to voluntarily give up that control. And the only reason that they would give up that control is if they held some amount of goodwill for the group to whom they're giving up control, or if they have a desire to be seen as being fair. So you're saying these people who are oppressors and are known oppressors are going to somehow turn around and be noble and then give up that oppression and not just treat them equally from this point forward, but to treat them better than they would treat themselves to make up for the ill treatment in the past, to show remorse, to feel guilt, which is not the kind of things that a sociopathic patriarchy is likely to ever do. So if there is no patriarchy, then it's inherently unfair. If there is a patriarchy, there's very little chance that they're going to actually do it. The only way that it's going to make sense is if you have a bunch of people who are not part of the patriarchy, but also value being seen as not being part of that patriarchy to the extent that they are willing to sacrifice some of their comfort in order to regain that status of being a decent, fair, and just society. So it's not the most compelling argument when dealing with an actual patriarchy. The next issue to consider is the way in which male/female oppression, assuming it exists, would be different from, say, inter-race, or is it intra-race, or between religions, or between sects, or other groups. It's going to be different because if you think about it, every human being that exists now has an equal number of male and female ancestors. That doesn't mean they raised you, but from a genetic standpoint, you have a male and a female because it's sperm and egg pretty much. I don't know all the medical things, so maybe there are a couple people who are rolling around that didn't require input from both a male and a female ancestors. Even if you use in vitro or sperm or egg donors, it's still a male and a female ancestor. And so if we're looking back through the annals of time, where we're saying women are oppressed and therefore they ascribe some virtue because they are the oppressed class, and men are oppressors, so therefore they have some debt because they're the oppressing class. When you look at any individual at the time of their birth, and probably subsequently, they have an equal number of both female virtue and male blame from their ancestors, and they would net out to zero. At their time of birth, they are all square. For every, we'll call it, unit of debt that is owed to a female ancestor, there is a balancing debt owed by their male ancestor. And so therefore, when you're born, nobody should owe you anything based upon male to female oppression. Because if it benefited one of your ancestors, it penalized another. If it penalized one, it benefited another. So you start at zero. There's nothing owed to you, right? So the most you can expect, if you're going to be a fair person yourself, is to be treated with some level of equanimity and fairness while you're on this particular life, when you're living this life, because you wouldn't bring any debt or balance from the past. You know, it's just if somebody treats you fairly and I get opportunities. So it feels like this whole collective women thing ignores the fact that every woman has the same number of men in her ancestry as they do women. Like women don't come from a long line of only women. Men don't come from a long line of only men. I might have a mother who was oppressed. I might have a grandmother who was oppressed. In fact, I might have 2 or 4 great-grandmothers that were oppressed. Just because I'm male now doesn't mean that my ancestors, at the time I was born, I was neither oppressor or oppressed. So I don't claim to cover or have read or been familiar with all that there is in feminism. I do know that I see lots of videos on YouTube where people make essentially the same arguments over and over and over again, using the exact same words. They use a clip from Emma Watson. They use the dictionary definition of feminism that they pull off of the internet somewhere, some dictionary, and that's what it is. And then they say if people only realized what feminism was, they would realize that they were feminists. All these things, it's the exact same arguments over and over again, and they may well be true. I'm not saying that they're not true. I don't think it matters whether they're true or not. What matters is if you say the same thing the exact same way, it doesn't reach people. It's like seeing a commercial for a hamburger 147 times in a row. After a while, you don't want the hamburger anymore, no matter how delicious it seems. So my point is, if you want to preach to people, don't read verbatim from the book. Don't read verbatim from your speaking points. Talk out of your own heart. Talk out of your own experience. Talk out of your own feelings. If Emma Watson wrote her own speech, maybe it would be a good idea for you to do the same. Now, whatever personal feelings that I have about feminists and feminism, I think if I were to give advice to a child, I would give them this piece of practical advice. If you live in a society where you are part of an oppressed group, such that you have to work harder to get ahead, then my advice to you would be work harder to get ahead. The problem describes the solution. You're not going to convince people who have an advantage over you to give up their advantage over you unless they love you very much. So if you're a feminist, either you're wasting your time or you must know that men love you very much. If neither of those are the case, then my advice to you is, if it's harder to be a woman, then roll up your sleeves and get to working. I am not your ally. I am not your enemy. I don't even know you. But at least I'm telling you what I think is the truth, and that's showing you respect. I hope if anybody shows up and decides to reply in the comments, you'll be respectful of others. And I hope you have a good day. Thanks. I want to say thank you to all those who've gotten this far. I appreciate you hanging in with me. I hope that I didn't say anything that offended you, although I don't take responsibility because it was not my intent. As always, I hope you like and subscribe. Take care. Bye-bye.